This is NATO's eastern line of defense. Tensions are running high, and here in the Baltic states, the military alliance is building an advanced presence to counter one country.
Russia have the intention to test NATO, and it's a question how much opportunities we will give them.
While troops on the ground are a big statement, there is a number behind the scenes that's far more significant.
2%.
2%. 2%. 2%.
That's the share of their economic output that NATO members committed to spend on defense. But for a while, countries didn't get anywhere near that number. And under multiple administrations, the US hasn't been happy about it.
They said, well, if we don't pay, are you still going to protect us? I said, absolutely not.
The threat from Russia means that is starting to change.
We have no time. We have to be prepared as fast as possible.
Now, some are asking if 2% is even enough. This is Pabrade military base, about an hour outside of Vilnius, where drills have increased and units like this one are training together with American soldiers.
Our society, as they call it, is vaccinated by Russian imperialism long years ago. So we understand we need to be strong to deter Russia.
The Baltic nations have been calling for a permanent presence for NATO troops, and that is really aimed at deterring any sort of Russian aggression pointed at NATO or its allies by creating this more forward-leaning and permanent presence right at the border there.
You have different countries, NATO members, that are taking the lead in each of the Baltic states. So you have Germany in Lithuania, Canada in Latvia, and the UK in Estonia.
And the idea is that if Russia were to attack any of those battle groups, it would potentially have to confront a reaction from any of the NATO nations.
Now NATO is boosting that presence, increasing from battle groups of around 1,000 troops up to brigades, 3 or 4 times the size. And Germany is leading the way, with plans for a permanent brigade in Lithuania. This base is going to house some of the 5,000 German troops arriving in Lithuania over the next few years.
In those barracks will be stationed allies or partners who are coming for exercise or stationed here in Lithuania. This year we're already opening a third infrastructure site or military garrison.
And that German presence is significant, because for the past decade, the second biggest economy in NATO wasn't even close to meeting its defense spending goals. That commitment dates back to 2014. When Russia invaded Ukraine's Crimean Peninsula that year, NATO countries promised to spend at least 2% of their GDP on defense within a decade. When the pledge was made, just 3 countries, the UK, Greece, and the US, met the target. In 2022, the year Russia launched its full-scale war in Ukraine, 7 spent that much. This year, 18 countries, or a little more than half, are expected to reach the target. The US contribution remains the largest by far, followed by Germany.
The arrival of German soldiers means a lot for Lithuania. That gives a big signal to our neighbors from eastern side that NATO is strong and allies are ready to defend each other.
Our plan to be ready in 2027 to host here a whole German brigade.
This is a big shift for Germany. The government says it will hit 2% of GDP on defense spending this year for the first time since the Cold War. And in 2022, days after Russia invaded Ukraine, the German government announced a €100 billion special defense fund.
That's at a time when the German economy is flirting with a recession, but also it's controversial in Germany in any case. There's a significant pacifist lobby, and these people are not happy about the levels of money that are being spent on defence and supplying Ukraine with weapons.
Much of that defense budget is being spent on German weaponry made by the likes of Rheinmetall and Hensoldt, companies that are benefiting significantly from the outlay. Rheinmetall, for example, was valued at a little over €4 billion before the war. Now it's at more than 20 billion. Even as some NATO member states creep towards that 2% spending target, some suspect it may not be enough to deter Russia.
The figures are probably going to have to go a lot higher than 2%, probably more towards Cold War level spending, where we saw countries spending as much as 3 or 4% of GDP on defense.
Let's consider what this would mean in terms of actual spending, using the US and its G7 allies. If they were to reach such levels, that would equate to more than $10 trillion of additional commitments over the next decade. That's more than Germany and Japan's economies combined. Former President Donald Trump's disdain for NATO has added to the urgency.
I got $430 billion more for NATO from these other countries that were delinquent, they weren't paying.
This idea that Donald Trump could theoretically pull the US out of NATO is an existential issue for European governments. His focus during his presidency on spending by NATO allies in Europe, chastising them and prompting them to try and spend more, there is some acknowledgement in European capitals that that was the right idea.
While the picture across NATO is of higher spending, there are sizable differences among individual countries. Take a look at places like Luxembourg, Spain, and Italy. When it comes to percentage of GDP, they're lagging way behind the Baltic states.
And that's creating internal divisions, but also it's a very complex decision for governments to justify, because of course every euro that's spent on defence is a euro that's not spent on schools or hospitals.
Many EU countries with the biggest shortfalls also have high levels of debt and budget deficits. So to spend more, they'll need to make painful choices between deeper levels of borrowing, budget cuts, or higher taxes.
Despite who will win in the United States in November, the question of border sharing, it will be more and more intensive. For Western Europeans, at least 2% would be a minimum.
Vladimir Putin has denied any plans to attack NATO, long an unthinkable option given the risk of nuclear escalation. Now, new members are joining old allies, aiming to have 300,000 troops on high alert. All of that, plus support for Ukraine, will require a lot more funding.